This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
Hey everybody, welcome to Storytellers Cafe, and I'm your host Usha Venkatraman. It feels good to be back on Storytellers Cafe after a gap of couple of weeks. You know, I enjoy hosting Storytellers Cafe. It's been my pleasure for the last 2 years to bring wonderful, varied, multi-talented storytellers, Indian storytellers. They may be by birth Indians from across the world, and to present them to the global Indian diaspora. As you know, friends, Storytellers Cafe is a number one storytelling podcast show on Bharat FM, a Cincinnati based radio station, which was set up actually in just at the beginning of the pandemic. So, Storytellers Cafe is on its third season this year. Thank you for your commitment every week, for making this commitment. You come back every other week to listen, learn, and enjoy. Thank you for choosing to listen to Storytellers Cafe. As you know, friends, I enjoy these episodes. I love curating them. I love searching for new storytellers who are of Indian origin from around the world, and somehow the universe seems to be, bringing them in my I would say radar, so that there is no dearth of Indian storytellers, and they are wonderful. It's been a discovery for me the last 2 years. I'm sure you all would agree with me. So I always, as you know, try to discover new storytellers, fascinating people who are doing so much in their life through their experience, work, and what they have achieved. Tonight, our guest is not from India. Just wait. She is someone very special whose name I came across on the internet. Yes, while I was searching for something else. And I said, wow, Chandrika Joshi has to be my guest on Storytellers Cafe. Yes, my guest tonight, you guessed it right, is Chandrika Joshi from Wales. But before I bring her onto the screens, I just want to give a little background about today's session. You know, the English lexicon for people living outside their country of origin has been shaped by the historical forces of colonialism, globalization, immigration, and war. The terms, and I'm sure you're familiar with this: migrant, refugee, immigrant, and expatriate, are rooted in the different political and socio-economic realities of the migrating groups and in the dynamics between the receiving countries. Today, refugee is a legal term as defined by the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees as a person who, owing to a well founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside the country of his or her nationality. It's not about moving to a different country for a better life. It's about fleeing for survival. As we all know what's happening in the world today, with the war being waged between two powerful countries. Okay, to lose one's place without gaining another, to be alienated from one without being able to assimilate in another. This has always been the fate of the refugee. In her brilliant essay, We Refugees, Hannah Arendt writes, "We wanted to build our lives. That was all. That's what a refugee wants to do. In order to rebuild one's life, one has to be strong and an optimist. So, we are very optimistic. Our optimism indeed is admirable, even if we say so ourselves. And why not? We lost our home, which means the familiarity of our daily life. We lost our occupation, which means the confidence that we are of some use in this world. We lost our language, which means the naturalness of reactions, the simplicity of gestures, the unaffected expression of feelings. We leave our relatives and loved ones and our best friends. Some of them have been killed in concentration camps, and that means the rupture of private lives. That is what a refugee experiences. Now, I won't go into detail about it, but I have been fascinated by Jhumpa Lahiri's, her famous book about interpretation of maladies, which was mainly about migrant people coming into the United States. But, friends, let's get back to our guest in the studios tonight. It's my honor, and I mean it, my deep pleasure, Bharat FM's deepest pleasure in bringing Chandrika Joshi as my guest on Storytellers Cafe tonight. Chandrika was born in Uganda, where her parents had migrated to from Gujarat when they were very young. Her father was a Hindu priest and a Kathakaar. She grew up listening to stories and songs from India. Her mother told stories every night at bedtime, stories that she had heard from her mother, stories about her childhood in India, and stories from the Hindu religious texts such as Puranas and Itihaas. Her father told stories from the epics, from the Puranas, set to song, a format known as Akhyana in Gujarat. We will learn more about it from Chandrika. So, they migrated to Wales 50 years ago due to expulsion of Asians from Uganda. Chandrika went on to become a dentist and specialized in working with people with disabilities. Her career choice took her into getting further qualifications in psychology and counselling. 20 years ago, she followed her father's footsteps and officiated her first Hindu wedding as a Hindu priestess. She retired from dentistry and now works as a Hindu priestess and a storyteller. She likes telling stories that are personal, woven with myths and legends. Her recent show was called Thornfanau Tales. Thornfanau Tales, a story of her journey from Uganda to Wales, woven with stories from the Katha Sagara, the ocean of stories. Storytelling and writing go hand in hand, is what Chandrika believes. And after her publication of her short stories and positive acknowledgement from the literati of Wales, she began venturing into writing stories. You can follow Chandrika on Facebook. She's Chandrika Joshi 52 and also known as Hindu Priestess on Facebook. And her Instagram handle is Hindu underscore priestess underscore storyteller. We will be having all this on her page, so you can definitely reach out and contact Chandrika and be in touch. And Chandrika has just freshly come from a festival in Wales. And without further ado, let me get Chandrika Joshi on to our studios tonight. Welcome, Chandrika. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you for asking me to be part of this fantastic podcast that you do.
An honor, Chandrika. It's really an honor. Every time I am blessed and I feel how lucky I am to face wonderful storytellers, albeit, on screen or, on an online session. And it's just wonderful because I learned so much in this process. So, Chandrika, um, I know there is a very brief introduction about you, but it read like a story. To me, it was a story introducing you. We would like to know your story.
Okay, so my parents, my father migrated first of all from Gujarat in 1935. He was 18 years old to start a new life in East Africa, in a country called Uganda. He married my mother just before India became independent. And my mother, at the age of 16, married my father. And then a year later, she also moved to Uganda. So I was born in Uganda and grew up. My father was a priest, so grew up in a family where philosophy and religion are discussed on a daily basis. Um, I would say my parents were quite liberal and allowed the children to partake in discussions as much as um, guided by them. And from a young age, we were taught recitation of mantras and shloks, etc. So I grew up in that sort of a household, and my I would say my mother probably was the key person in storytelling because at the age of 16, and my father was only 18 when they left. And I've been thinking about that, and I thought, do you know what, those formative years, the less than 20 years, are so important because whatever they had gained about Indian culture, art, literature, songs, and Hinduism as a religion was all passed on to us. And so we grew up listening to what it was like for my mother growing up as a child. My grandmother was a very good storyteller and told a lot of fables and stories, which I don't know where, I wonder if she had heard them from her mother. And what was interesting is most of the stories had women as the key person in that story. So they were always the protagonist. And so I grew up with listening to stories where women held a key position in society. And even my mother's stories, I would say, even the epics were Savitri, but not Savitri as sometimes she's portrayed in mainstream media as a, someone Sati Sita, where these terminology are used, particularly in Indian media. What Savitri is. To me, Savitri, from what I learned from my mother, sorry, Savitri is a strong woman, someone who stands against face to face to a god of death and wins, is a strong person. So I
Absolutely.
never understood Savitri as someone weak who is washing her husband's feet and
Yeah.
drying them with her long hair, which is the kind of stuff you sometimes hear about. I grew up believing Savitri was powerful and strong. So I grew up in Africa though. So, but Indian culture, language, first language was Gujarati, second language English. And of course, we often spoke Gujarati with Swahili words because that was the language of the nation and of Uganda. So a lot of Ugandan Asians, Indians speak Gujarati with Swahili words. Um, um, yeah, so that was my childhood, and I lived there until I was 14. And I remember sort of my mother taking clay and molding a Parvati, and then we would have Parvati at a particular time of the year when women worship Parvati, and Parvati would be there with cowrie shell eyes, and um, she would put flowers in her hair, and all the women would get together and they would grow wheat because it's a harvest, it's a planting season, it's a monsoon season. So wheat is planted in India. So you celebrate that planting season with Parvati, the goddess, and my mother would then tell us stories of Parvati. So yeah, I grew up um, having confidence of women's position in society and in life in general.
That's so wonderful to hear. Women empowerment in Uganda, growing up in a, usually a priest family, who follows, considered to be very traditional, maybe very conservative. But no, you have uh, kind of shattered that myth around that. You know, that's wonderful. What are your early memories of growing up in Uganda before you had to leave the country?
Before we had to leave, the early memories I have are very um, well, it's about the nature and the type of trees and the flowers and the butterflies. Um, Uganda was known as the Pearl of Africa. So it was
Mhm.
very green and very fertile. Anything you put in the soil would flower, would grow. So a lot of time playing outside, never inside. You know what it's like with Indian homes, they're also that the doors and the windows are always open. And what happens is that you run from one house to another neighbor's house. You don't go and knock on the door to say, please, may I come in? You just run in and you play. And if they're eating, they'll just say, come on, beta, sit down, have something to eat. So that's the kind of lifestyle we also had in Uganda. So um, everything felt very secure. Um, uh, yeah, to an extent, also I felt privileged, quite honestly, because we also had, even within the town I grew up in, there were people who couldn't afford school fees for their children, etc. So I grew up from a very young age knowing that if my parents can afford my school fees, then I'm privileged. That education was considered in my family one of the best things that you can have in life. So I think if you can go to school, you are privileged. That's how I grew up. Yeah.
I agree with you, that entitled, because there are so many who can't afford education. And definitely to be educated, to have access to education is certainly an entitlement, which I think which is something that uh, we have. It's a precious gift. Not everyone has it. And I think you've used it beautifully. You went on to becoming a dentist. But before we come to your profession, dentistry, what about the transformation and the migration to Wales, and why Wales? What happened that set you in motion to migrate, to flee Uganda?
Yeah. So when my parents emigrated from Gujarat to Uganda, India was a British colony and Uganda was a British protectorate. So both under the control of the British. So my parents emigrated, and then of course Uganda became independent in 1962, and we had our first prime minister. And the policies of the prime minister were already upsetting the British, because he wanted to follow the policy of Africanization. And that meant that Ugandan Asians who had still retained their British passports, he was not happy with, because the a lot of large number of businesses in Uganda were of Indian businesses, and Milton Obote was the prime minister initially, but then he made himself executive president and banned elections and other political parties, etc. So in those 10 years, I think my parents already were worried that what will happen is that we will not be welcome, we will not be allowed to stay in Uganda. So Milton Obote was removed from power in 1971 by the army general by the name of Idi Amin Dada. So Amin took over the country, and within a year, he gave us 3 months' notice to leave Uganda. Otherwise, we would be hurt. So in 1972 August, we were given 3 months' notice to leave the country. And you can imagine, Usha, my father had emigrated in 1937. And after emigrating to Uganda in 1937, my father only visited India twice. So you can see the amount of investment you do of your life, your years in a country, thinking that that's going to be yours for life. And everything he had earned, we left behind, we were told that we could take £50 per family and 20 kilograms of possessions. So we came with my father's books. So, sort of all these old books that we used to have this big bookshelf in the front room full of these old books, a lot of them religious, majority of them religious in Sanskrit, Hindi, Gujarati. So as children, we would initially just open up this Mahabharata and look at all these pictures, old pictures, and luckily we brought the books, and the photographs,
Wonderful. What precious memories. I mean, what really was precious for you and your family. So, how was it, and how did you decide to move into Wales?
It was
And
very
why
difficult
Wales?
time, It was a very difficult time leaving because suddenly to be told that you're going to be taken out of school, school started shutting down. The town, we lived in a small village, a small town, and my sister and I were in a school in Kampala, which was 80 kilometers away, because there were no secondary schools in the little village where we lived. And so we were put in a girls' hostel, and both young, we both left home at the age of 12 and lived in a girls' hostel so we could access a good secondary school. And the girls' hostel was run like Indian Gurukul system. So, it was it was all the doing the Sandhya and doing Havan at night,
Okay.
learning to recite all these mantras, etc. Also, what was really nice were that every fortnight we had to do a show. So just for other 100 girls who also lived there, but every fortnight there would be a show. So we would learn to dance and sing and write plays so we could act in it. So quite, quite sort of enriching, because you're learning so much from girls from other parts of Uganda who'd all gathered together for education. And when we were told that we would have to leave, everything shut down, and the schools shut down. So we were put in a taxi and sent back home. And it was a fearful time. We were hearing a lot about women being raped, women, sort of people being beaten up, people being shot. It was a crazy time. So, everything starts unraveling. The life the community, the town that we had, which we called home, started unraveling. 1 minute someone is there, next minute they've left. So Britain took its time before it agreed that the Ugandan Asians who had British passports could enter enter Britain. And once they did and opened up their embassy so that we could have our visas, we only had a day's notice. My father got the visas and the passports stamped and came home and said, we are leaving. He came sort of like at daytime from Kampala and said, we are leaving tomorrow. So we had a day to pack. So, we just got the suitcases and packed our whatever belongings. And, we had to flee the country with all the going through all the army checkpoints and people pointing guns at you, and ended up in Heathrow Airport the day after. And we were put on a train, not knowing where we are going. And 5-hour journey in a train, which came and stopped at a station where it was raining, it was freezing cold, and we came out of the train and we could hear the sea, sort of the waves of the ocean. And we'd come to a place in Wales known as Tonfanai. So Tonfanai, it was a resettlement camp. It used to be an army barracks, which was not in use. So what the British government did was that they opened up the old army barracks and cleaned them up and housed the I still consider us as refugees because we were looking for refuge. So we were housed then in that camp where we lived for probably about 3 to 4 months. So that's why Tonfanai Tales, because Tonfanai was a resettlement camp. It was like a refugee camp.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I know.
And that was our first sort of experience of what Britain was like. It was October, we came in, so it was cold and raining, and it is an absolute wilderness. The Tonfanai camp was near a very small town called Tawyn in North Wales, and you are just totally isolated. You don't really see the British towns and society the way it is, because we were in an isolated place. Yeah.
Was it scary, Chandrika? You were a teenager.
I was a teenager. I was 14 then when we came here. And 14 is always a difficult age because you're already trying to find yourself, between not quite a girl and not quite a woman, it's an in-between stage. So you're already trying to find yourself, who you are. And to then land in another culture, another place. And yeah, I found it uncomfortable. I found, my mother, again, was a key person. She started learning English because they had these little places, they were teaching English to women, etc. My father had already studied English when he was at school in India. I have a very nice family story to tell you, which was like, my mother, when she was little, she married at the age of 16. And my grandfather was a Sanskrit teacher and quite old-fashioned, and didn't want his daughter to continue her education after a certain age. He wanted her to get married. All my mother's friends had got married by the time they are 14. So, and my mother was still single, and my grandfather took her out of school. My uncle was really of that mentality that he wanted his sister to be educated. And my grandfather said, look, you can you can educate your daughters the way you want, but she's my daughter and I want her not to be educated any further. And my uncle kept on asking his father to say, well, at least allow her so she learns a little bit of English. And my grandfather was like, no. And he took her out of school. So my grandfather relied on his son's income. As you know, in 1930s, India was, the whole world was having problems with the Great Depression, etc. So my uncle decided that he was going to use his salary to get a governess who will teach my mother English. So a governess would come every day and teach my mother English. And when we were in that refugee camp, because my mother had learned basic English from that governess, and my mother wrote a letter to her brother to say that, thank you so much for doing what you did, because now I'm in a country where they only speak English, and your contribution has been so helpful to me, because at least I know basic English and now I can build on that to learn the language. So that was that's always stayed with me, that my uncle had done that for my mother. So
Oh,
yeah,
how wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah, these are nuggets, these are stories, memories, which create such an impact on a young person, on a young Chandrika, when your mother must have shared this
Yeah.
uh, with you. There is, I can understand the connect, the bonding, and being a refugee in a foreign country, in a land where I don't know what the weather was in Uganda where you lived. Did you have winters which was cold, freezing? But I can understand how Wales must have been,
Yeah.
you know.
Uganda was,
And
you have, even in India, you have seasons. And Uganda had not very clear seasons. It was
okay.
sunshine, it was equatorial. So 7 o'clock, the sunrise, 7 in the evening, the sun sets. Very little twilight, it would just set very quickly. And so hardly any seasons, and it would rain suddenly, and then it would be warm rain, and it would dry out very quickly. So throughout the year we had probably the same type of weather, which was nice temperature, about between 20 to 25 degrees, and it would rain often, and so we were not really quite aware of seasons like you are in India, and particularly here, the seasons are so dramatic and clear. And we came in the winter, which was a cold, it was cold for us because we were used to a warm country.
So tell us, Chandrika, how was it living in a settlement? I mean, you would call it a refugee camp,
Mm-hmm.
even 4 months.
Mm.
How was it? Were you all Indians who had moved from Uganda?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you were all residents of Uganda
yeah.
who had moved here into the settlement. And how did the transition take place?
Well, yes, we were, all the residents in that camp were Ugandan Asians who had been thrown out of Uganda. 28,000 people left Uganda, Indians and Indian origin, and Britain accepted 28,000 people, and they had opened many camps like this, um, like the ones we lived in, and um, we did there were nice things and there were sort of like things which were uncomfortable. I mean, they had a canteen, so we would queue up for food, but of course all the food was British food, and we were not used to it. So initially, you eat this toast and beans and boiled vegetables and boiled potatoes, and we, after a week, we were obviously fed up of it, because you can't mm, you can't carry on like that. And then we sort of, there were people who complained to say that allow some of us to cook so we can cook our own food. And they agreed. So then they started making like parathas and a few, other things. And we started having some Indian food. And the other thing is, the Uganda, we had Hindus, Muslims, Sikh people, Gujaratis, predominantly Gujaratis, although there were some Punjabis as well, people living in Uganda. And we all lived quite closely as a Gujarati community. And so we would celebrate Eid, and they would celebrate Diwali, and, everyone lived very sort of closely. But the Muslim community were very mindful that, particularly my family, because we didn't even, we never ate anything animal product except milk. So no eggs, nothing, right? So I don't think, no, we hadn't even, I'd never even seen anyone break an egg when I was in Uganda. So it was so protected, right? And
No, same here. I grew up in a very, very vegetarian
yeah,
family where egg never. I mean,
no,
we were
never.
vegetarian. Yeah,
Yeah.
never, never.
And you are brought up like that. And
Yes.
and our neighbors were a Muslim family, and they were very mindful that because they would eat meat, but they would eat it in their house. So they would not prepare anything outside their house as not to offend. And so quite we lived in really harmony, quite frankly. So and then having to go to a canteen where you have meat on one side, vegetable on the other side, and my parents were like totally stunned, that, oh my God, we have to like, eat this food because there was nothing else there. So I think that was very clear. Those kind of things in the camp were very clear.
Chandrika, if I may ask, when you had to flee Uganda because you were asked to leave the country
Yeah.
by the then ruler,
Yeah.
did any thoughts of coming to India ever come? Did it arise? Or since you all were, it was a British colony, you had your British passport, and probably you were British, I mean, Uganda, Asians, I don't know what it was. Was it normal, natural to go across to the United Kingdom?
The discussions took place at home. My mother, and also I had an aunt who lived with us, because my uncle, who is my paternal uncle, um, I go back a step. My father became an orphan at a very young age. And that meant that his older brother, and his brother was quite a bit older, one of his brothers, and my father, each older brother decided to take responsibility for a younger brother. There's 6 brothers. So my father's responsibility fell on my Laljiada, my uncle, who had then left. He was about 20 odd. He had left India to go to Uganda, and hence my father ended up in Uganda. So when the expulsion time came, my mother wanted to go back to India. So my mother said, "We don't want to go anywhere else. We'll go to India, and we will set up a home there, and it'll be fine." And my father wanted to go to the UK. And one of the rationale was that when my brother was 16, my eldest brother was 16, my father sent him to UK to do his A levels. So my brother was already studying in UK, doing his A levels. And my father's rationale was not to break the family up, that we will be together as a family. And my father also looked at it that he was already in his 50s. He's lost everything he has. And it was like to start fresh in India is a much harder life at that age than it would be to start in the UK. So I think he basically won the argument that we should emigrate to the UK. And because don't forget, Usha, education is free. University education was free when I went to university here. So
Okay.
in India my father was very much aware that to go to good schools, etc. He's got 6 children to support, to educate. And
Absolutely. And also, India was going through its own turmoil. I remember the 70s were the time for the emergency, and
yeah,
a lot of turmoil was going on in India as well. Yes, absolutely. That was just a curiosity that. Why not return to the homeland? But
yeah,
like you said, when you already had a sibling studying.
yeah,
So, Chandrika, can we fast forward and go to your schooling? And how did you decide to study dentistry, get into the medical field?
yeah.
And then later on became a priestess, which you followed your father's footsteps. Because
Yeah,
I just want to tell my audience here, to all the listeners, that this is a two-part series with Chandrika Joshi, as you know, because it's so engrossing to listen to her journey from Uganda to Wales. So we thought we would talk about her personal journey and her story of moving to this country, which gave her refuge and which has also given her lots, as I'm sure Chandrika would agree with me. And we will unravel all those and more in the part two series, where she will share with us stories, because
yeah,
she is a storyteller. So, Chandrika, okay. So, moving on, do continue about
yeah.
your
So
stay
in this
in.
Sorry, Yusha. So in this country, we were given little sort of what are known as council houses, which are government houses, and
Yes.
you just pay a minimal rent and live there. So we were given a house, but we were housed in a place which is isolated in Wales, and we started schooling there. I was the only Indian person in my class. And we were also isolated, quite frankly, because all the Indian communities lived in bigger towns. And I decided by the time I was 16 that instead of choosing art, I would choose chemistry, because you think like a migrant, that I have to stand on my own 2 feet. Art is not going to give me a guarantee of a job when science will. So all migrants think like that. They look at professions which guarantee you a job. So I started with chemistry, etc. And later on, I decided to follow become a dentist, because I was good at arts. Actually, I was always good at arts. I was good at painting, drawing, writing. Languages and arts were my favorite subjects. And I thought, well, dentistry is quite good because it's manual, it's a craft as much as it is a science. So I chose dentistry as a career. um, which I never regretted. To an extent, I did enjoy my career quite a lot. It is medical, but it's also creative. And within that field, I chose that. There was a part of me who wanted to do medicine, but I wanted to do medicine, and it was always these ideas that I want to work with poor people. I want to go back to India and work there, in rural places, etc. But I didn't apply for medicine. So anyway, I did dentistry, and then I thought, well, what do I want to do? I want to work in practice. Do I want to work in hospital? And I thought, you know what? I want to work with people with disabilities because that would be the most satisfying. So I worked my whole career, my 30 or 35 years of dentistry career was working with people with disabilities. So that includes mental health problems, dementia, learning disability, physical disability, all kinds of vulnerabilities, homeless people. I used to walk in the streets in London with a Catholic priest by my side, who talking to homeless people and finding out what their needs were. So it was a good career because it was more than dentistry. It was working with people who are vulnerable.
Absolutely. By what you are saying, it was more than that. And Chandrika, there is so much that I would like to know. But is there something, an enduring image, of your growing up years, studying in the university, and did you feel a sense of belonging, or did you experience this alienation, uh, with others? And then when did you feel comfortable and say, I am a British citizen, I am here? How long did that take? Is there
Gosh.
any incident that you would like to tell us? And we can end today's session and continue the part two next time, because there's so much,
There's so much.
to
Yeah.
know. But I'm sure our listeners would love to know
Yeah.
about it.
I think it was a lifetime's journey to come home, to feel at home, because I recognized it very quickly by the time I was 16, 17, that I don't feel at home. And I just didn't feel at home. I went through school and universities and got myself busy. And as soon as when I was at dental school, I must have been 25, 26 when I made my first visit to India. And at that stage, I thought, I went to Varanasi, the BHU University, right? So it was a Banaras Hindu University at that stage. So I went there for a month to work in the surgery department under one of the consultants as one of my elective. And I thought Varanasi is a good place to go. And part of me thought that I will come to India and I will straight away fit in, I will feel at home, and everything will be like, this is my home. And it was so different than I imagined India to be. And I felt that India, and I still feel India is my spiritual home, but it remains my spiritual home. In some respect, I've never lived in India. And maybe now I can, but at that stage, I recognized and realized that it was so different from my home in Africa, that it wasn't, especially Gujarat and that part of North India. I didn't feel it was green. I didn't feel it was lush. It was dry. It was just something I wasn't used to. So then I went back to Africa, searching for a home. When I finished, I qualified, and I felt I had changed within myself. So I didn't fit in there either. So for me, finding home was a lifetime's journey. I didn't come home I didn't feel this country is home until I was in my 40s. That's a long, and there's a beautiful word the Welsh have, which is in Welsh language, you call it hiraeth. Hiraeth means this panging, which is this pain you feel within yourself for home. And um, I felt that all the time. I missed that home that I had. I constantly missed it. I missed that courtyard. As I saw as a child, I missed those big stars in the sky. I missed those mango trees which were outside my house. And I missed all of that, in that stability, my mother telling stories at night. And I think it was like something had fractured when we left Uganda, and it's like it can't join again. And I miss that. And part of Tonvanai Tales is searching for home when I came back to Wales. And Usha, this is my home, this is my mandir, this is everything. And I sort of, I've got my father's books here, which I had in Uganda. And when I look at it now, I think I am at home, because I discovered that the sky is the same sky I saw in Uganda. It's the same sky my parents saw in India when they were children. And it's the sky on earth that allows us to feel that it is one earth. Because, when we live on earth, we are divided into countries, etc. And this is yours and this is not yours. But in reality, if we imagine that the canopy, the sky, is the only one sky which is not divided, that actually earth is not divided. We have to belong everywhere. Otherwise, we never come home.
Chandrika, as I'm listening to you, in my mind, thoughts are running. And I said, you had a revelation. Maybe it was in your 40s. But, to accept the truth and to live it and to come to peace with it is not many people have that. And after such a turbulent childhood and the things that you have gone through, not many average person doesn't go through it, and then to come out of it and to be peace with yourself, because what you're talking about, there's just one sky, the one blue sky. You could have a mango tree outside, you can have all the things, it's just what you create and what you believe. And wonderful, wonderful, Chandrika. It is, and I'm sure you bring this insight, this, wealth of your experience in your stories. So, and that gives it a special edge, because all of us can tell stories, but there are storytellers who are gifted, because when they bring that X element or that one chromosome or whatever, which makes their storytelling special. And I can already imagine, and that is your gift to when you tell your stories, you're living them. It's your life story, and you like to intersperse your life story with myths and with our Puranas and
Yeah.
Itihaas, and that is something wonderful, which I would like you to talk a little bit about that and then end today's session, if that's fine with you. And we continue with uh, listening to your storytelling journey in Wales. And also that you said you became a priestess, and for that you had to be qualified, you had to certify yourself, right, to do certain rites, of whatever passage or certain ceremonies. You need to be
You need
qualified
to
and
learn it.
certified.
Yeah.
Yes. So we could talk, if we could end with the suggestion of um, that element that you bring into storytelling. How did that how did the progression from a dentist, a professional medical person, into following this passion? Because I'm sure every day it is a catharsis for you.
Yeah.
It's, when you tell stories, I feel
Yeah.
that.
It is. Yeah.
I love it. I'm transported into a different realm, I would say, a different dimension. I have spoken about this to my own spiritual guru, my Reiki master, that I just feel mm, that I'm looking at myself when I'm telling a story, standing apart. I'm
Mm.
looking at myself telling stories to an audience. So it's a very spiritual experience for me. It's multi-dimensional. I can experience that.
Mm.
Not that it happens all the time. sometimes.
I think storytelling is spiritual, you know. It is spiritual, and that's why I think it goes very hand in hand with what I do as a Hindu priest or priestess. So because my father was a priest and Hinduism was part and parcel of our everyday life. So by the time I was 18, etc., I started studying more and more about Hinduism. It was just a journey, never thinking I'm going to be a priest. And Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan was very useful because I started studying Sanskrit at Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and more and more about rituals, etc. But there is still discrimination against women within Hinduism, as you know, there are few schools. I think in India you've got a couple of schools now where they're training women, but in reality there's very little as far as formal training is concerned. But
Yes.
Hinduism has always accepted um, a father training his son, then the son train, and that sort of hierarchy is also there. So a friend of ours was getting married to an English girl, and in 2002, and asked my father, because my father had done his parents' wedding, and he wanted my father to do his wedding. My father by this stage was elderly and disabled, and my father said he just can't do it. So this friend then said, can anyone in your family do it? Now, my brother was trained by my father, and my brother said, no, I don't want to be a priest. I don't want to do it. And then my friend sort of said, can you do it? And I said, when is the wedding? And he said, next year. I said, well, I've got a year to learn, so I'll learn it. And I agreed to doing it because I felt that women should do it, and I wanted to make that mark to say women can be priests. Because quite frankly, Usha, the orthodox and traditional people probably wouldn't agree with it, but the way I look at it is that my Atma doesn't have a gender. As I believe that the Brahman or the Almighty or whoever you believe is that spirit of the universe doesn't have a gender. Because I believe that if we say God has a gender, because you always imagine God as masculine. And hence I would like to feel that God, if we can say it's God, Goddess together, gender free. And I wanted to make that mark. So I studied then and practiced the whole year. And I did my first wedding in 2002. And my brother sort of warned me. He said, you know, you're going as a woman, you know, there will be people who will challenge you, first of all. And number two is they will criticize you. And so I'd gone in, and dentistry, you know, anything you've done gives you that confidence that I wouldn't allow anyone, if I'm giving a lecture, to challenge me, or I would know exactly how to handle it. So I went in with that confidence, thinking anyone will challenge me, I know exactly how I will handle it. And Usha, you won't believe, no one challenged me. And all the women, elderly women, who my uncle and my father had married in Uganda, because they were Ugandan Asians similar to me, came and gave me big hugs and said, Beta, we are so proud of you. You're doing this, you know. And it was fantastic. And so that was my beginning of my priest journey 20 years ago.
Wonderful, Chandrika. It's been such a wonderful journey. And friends who have tuned in, if you've come in late, you can always watch this episode. Go back to the archives of Bharat FM Facebook page, and also on YouTube. You just have to type Storytellers Cafe with Chandrika Joshi, and you can watch this episode, this podcast. So let's hold our thoughts here. How Chandrika became a priestess and conducted her first wedding. So, and that was definitely a path breaking, and she kind of blazed a trail, I would say, you know. And we storytellers are trailblazers, aren't we? So, Chandrika, I would like to end this session one here, if I may. And would you just like to say any closing remark for this session so that we continue next week with more about you and listen to uh, maybe traditional tales or personal, because we've been listening to stories only. So many myths about storytelling, even in my own mind, that traditional stories are the stories that we tell. But there is a liberation when you tell your story.
Mm.
It's something which is very, very therapeutic. I've realized this because I've been sharing a few personal stories, and there is a sense of liberation, enjoyment in telling that, um, and putting those into words and sharing it with others. So, is there something that you would like to leave our listeners with? I'm sure they're all waiting to listen to more from you.
So I'm going to end by saying that when I was little, at night when my father wasn't there, we would nag my mother and said, "Ba, please, varta karo ne, tell us a story." And eventually, if my mother said yes, we would then pack up the makeka mats, take them into the courtyard, put them on the floor there, and put our pillows and our little blankets, and we would lie there and look at the sky. And it was pitch black. And these large stars that you can see in an African sky where there is no lighting outside. And my mother, when she came there, we would all go close to her like little dogs, little dogs really sit closely with you or their mummy dogs. We would just sit there and my mother would then start the story. And often she would sing a line and then she would continue with the story. So next time, maybe I can share a story which is mixed up with a personal story.
Thank you, Chandrika. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. And the last thing actually tells me let's continue because it's nighttime in India, in Mumbai.
Yeah.
And definitely not a starlit sky because it's cloudy. I couldn't even see the full moon 2 days back on Saturday. But that I can imagine because I've lived in a small town like Jhansi, where
Yeah.
we would sleep in the chatai. We would put our beds out in the lawn in the night and we would see the stars. And my father would talk about the constellations and everything. So it's something that I can, but I'm sure yours was magical. I experienced this inky blackness in Crete when I was doing a workshop on personal stories in the beautiful island of Crete at Amari. A few of us went down the hill at 2 in the morning and I was scared. I wanted to take my cell phone, and this Russian friend said, "No cell phones, no lights." I said, "What about snakes and what not?
Yeah.
That would come
Yeah.
out in the night?" She said, "Nothing."
Yeah. Wow.
And we went, so but I was scared, and then I think I was scared the entire journey, and I don't know, I think I came back and went off to sleep because it's not easy to break all that and do it, but it's wonderful. And our listeners, and I'm sure you all are waiting to know what's in store for you next time. Hold that thought, and I'll see you next Sunday, same place, same time, on Storytellers Cafe with our guest Chandrika Joshi. And this is to be continued.
Thank you,
So,
Usha.
Chandrika, yes.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. I will just play the jingle and we will close this podcast and we will continue it next week. Thank you so much, listeners, for learning, listening, enjoying Storytellers Cafe.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत।
ये है भारत एफएम।
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत।